Hey guys, Mick here. Today we're going to talk a bit about rim protection. So mountain biking or any cycling, you've typically got a choice between two main combinations of your tyres. You can either run tubes in your tyre or you can run tubeless. Now over the years a lot of us have moved to a tubeless setup where basically you put some sealant goop inside your tyre, you don't run a tube, and the idea is that if you get punctures or small holes, the sealant will seal it. It also means you reduce the chance of pinch flats because you don't have a tube. It also means you can run slightly lower pressures, which typically increases your grip and improves your cornering. Now the problems you start to have then is if you run lower pressure, you've got a chance of burping the tyre where you pop the sidewall off a bit and air and your sealant escapes and you end up with your tyre going down. You also don't have a lot of protection for your rims, so if you're running a lower pressure then there's more chance of taking a big hit and putting a dent in your rims. So that can be another issue. So getting around this, a number of companies have brought out rim protection of different types. Any rim protection is obviously going to have a weight penalty. So if you're a weight weenie and you're really trying to keep your wheel weight as low as possible, you're probably going to be not going for rim protection, and your lightest combination is probably a tubeless, and you just make sure that you don't hit things too hard. If you're riding more technical and a lot more rocky stuff and you really want some rim protection, then there's a few options out there on the market. The one that I've been using for a while is a system called Cush Core. Now the way this works is it goes inside your rim, your tyre fits underneath the edge of this, so it actually holds the bead of the tyre, and you run a tubeless combination. So you've got some goop in it and you run it as tubeless. Now the good thing about this is it holds the tyre onto the rim really, really well, which makes it really hard to actually pop a bead on the tyre. It provides a great protection for your rim because it's quite wide and it flares out over the edges of your rim, so it provides some good impact protection if you're running a softer tyre. It also tends to go up into the side of the tyre a little bit, so it stiffens up the tyre, so you get a little bit less tyre squirm if you're running a lower pressure. So there's a number of advantages. The biggest disadvantages that I see are that they're a bit of a pain to put on and off. I've sort of done it quite a bit and I'm reasonably competent at it, but taking them out of my tyres today probably took me 15 minutes to get it out. So they are a bit of a pain to get in and out. And you are still reliant on the tyre, so that if you get a rip in the sidewall of the tyre or you get a hole in the tyre that the sealant won't seal, then you start ending up with a situation where you have to take it apart and put a tube in it. And given that these are a bit of a pain to get out, and once again if you're out on the trail and you take it out and you put a tube in, you now have a Cush Core, which is a big rubber thing that you need to carry out with you. The pro side of that is if you're actually racing and you're doing something like a downhill race and you're flat halfway down, you can pretty much ride on a Cush Core, and hopefully it'll hold your tyre on and get you to the bottom in one piece, and then you take the time to fix it. But for trailside repairs, it's a real pain, not something I would really want to have to do. So one of the alternative approaches that I was actually keen on trying when I got my current bike was a system called a Tannus Armour. And I couldn't actually quickly get them because the bike arrived at the last minute. I had a trip that I was heading off on the day later, and the easiest ones to get was Cush Cores, so I put them in. So I sort of haven't got around to changing them. Now the last couple of days I've actually been given a set of Tannus to try. So as a disclaimer, I was given these to try and assess. So here's what I think of them. So the first thing is it's a completely different concept. So instead of sitting in at the rim side, this is a rounded profile that you can see. This goes inside your tyre, and it actually protects from inside the tyre. You then, rather than running tubeless goop, you actually put a tube inside it. So you can run a smaller, quite lightweight tube, which seems to me like a much better system. So the advantages you get over it is basically that you get a bit more protection from spikes and punches and so forth. You still get some rim protection, so that if you hit something hard, you've actually got a piece of rubber inside, and these are actually quite thick. The other thing is you get some support for your tyre, so it will hopefully help the tyre hold its shape at a bit lower pressure. And they're significantly easier to fit. The other thing is, for in the field, if you do get a flat, it's simply like changing a tube. So it should only take a couple of minutes, and you can quite easily put a new tube in it. So for me, the extra protection seems like a good idea. I'm assuming that it's not going to run as well flat. So from a race run point of view, if you do manage to do something that actually makes it go flat, then you're probably going to find it'll strip off the rim, I expect, if you try and ride on it. But it should take that initial hit out. But for a general rider, it means that if you do something extreme and you do actually manage to puncture the tube inside, then it should be a pretty easy trail repair to actually fix it. So I do like that concept. For the weight weenies amongst us, these come in slightly heavier than a Cush Core. So I think you can look up the specs online, I think they're around 320 grams as opposed to 260. I think I worked out there was about a 60 or 70 gram difference. And you're running a tube, so I've got some super light tubes, but they're still a little bit heavier than running the goop inside the tyre. Where you can save some weight though is I've been running downhill double down tyres on the bike, and they're about a 1.2, 1.3 kilo tyre, so they're a really, really heavy tyre. And the reason I do that is to get the sidewall protection. With the Tannus, you don't need the sidewall protection, so I can run a lighter tyre. And so in the tyres that I've been using, the Maxxis in the past, that I can get a more enduro sort of version of the tyre that's around 200 to 300 grams lighter. So I suspect I can probably build a slightly lighter setup, but it's still going to be heavy, right? It's still not going to be the lightest you can possibly go. The other advantage that I'm actually looking forward to with this type of system, with the ease of changing it, is it makes it easier to run different sorts of tyres. So in the old days when we used to all run tubes, I would quite often change tyres to suit where I was riding. And I'd do things when I was commuting, like on a Sunday night, I'd pull my tyres off, throw some slicks on the bike, then commute on the bike from Monday to Friday, and then Friday night pull the slicks off and throw my downhill tyres on and go ride it on trail on the weekend. I'd also do things like when I was racing, I'd put a brand new set of tyres on for the race so I had maximum grip, and then after the race was over, take the tyres off, put my old tyres back on again for training. And that meant that I always had kind of a fresh set for racing. And when the training tyres got a bit trashed, then the race ones become the training ones and you buy some new race ones. I also tended to, for different events when I was travelling, I'd take multiple sets of tyres so that I could actually have tyres that were appropriate for the terrain that I was going to race on. And a lot of that seems to have gone out the window now, because changing with tubeless and particularly, Cush Cores and things like that is such a pain that people now kind of just put a tyre on and they just run that tyre until it's old and trashed without actually ever really changing it. So yeah, there's a few advantages to this system. So I'm actually really, really keen to try it. So what we're going to do now is I'll fit it on my wheel and we'll see how hard that actually is, because this is literally the first time I've done it. And then I'll go for a ride and give you some feedback as to what I think. Now initially, my first test, I'm going to put these on with the tyres that I was running, which is a set of Maxxis Minion DH tyres in double downs. So this is going to be a heavy combination, but I really want to try and see how it feels on the bike running a Tannus versus a Cush Core. So if I change the tyres as well, then that's kind of a little bit of a different feel. Because I've actually got some other tyres that I'm going to test, and that will be in the next episode of this. So let's see how hard these are to fit up. So basically what I've got is I have a Minion DH tyre. This one's a little bit worn. It's getting due to be replaced anyway. And I have a Tannus Armour. Now interestingly, one of the other advantages I think with the Tannus system is this tyre got a hole in it. So it wasn't going to seal. So I can't use this tubeless anymore. So what that basically means is if I'm going to run a tubeless Cush Core system, I can throw this tyre away. Whereas with the Tannus, because the tyre actually doesn't have to be airtight, the tyre is fine. So I can put this back in and I can just keep riding with it. Okay, so what we're going to do is you take the Tannus and put it inside the tyre. That's gone in pretty straightforward. Yep, that's all gone in pretty nicely. Put the tyre on the rim. Brakes on the right. Make sure I get the direction right. Yep. So, simply put the tyre on the rim. Okay, so I have a tyre on the rim with the Tannus inside it. All seems to be lined up pretty well. I guess I probably could have read the instructions, but it didn't look that complicated. Now tube-wise, once again, one of the advantages of using the Tannus is supposedly, we'll see how that works, you don't need a particularly heavy-duty tube. So I've got, these are a set of Mitas ultralight, and they're only like a 195, so they're quite a thin tube, and they're really light, which is also good for carrying a spare. So I'm going to try these ones. I can always go with something a bit heavier if I need to. So just find the valve hole, which is always on the opposite side to where you want it. So it's a little bit fiddly. It's definitely a little bit more difficult than just a straight tyre, but so I've got that second layer, but it's not that much of a problem. So I'm just spinning that round, pop the tube in. I got to say, it's really nice not to be fiddling around with sealant at the moment. So, you know, sealant is always messy and you end up getting it everywhere. Okay, I've actually got a little bit much air in that tube. Just a little bit of air out of it. So push it in. And it seems like it's going to be a bit easier to go around first. Poke the Tannus in. It's just sitting down in the bead nicely. And now the tyre. Just had to find a tyre lever. Okay, so yeah, the last little bit, just going to pop on with the tyre lever. And we're on. So, the downside, that was a little bit more fiddly than normally putting just a tyre on. Most cases I can get a tyre on just with my fingers because you can sort of set it down on in the back of the rim. It was a little bit more difficult with the Tannus, maybe if I had a little bit less air out of the tube. Once again, it's the first time I've ever tried to fit one of these. And in a typical guy way, I didn't read the instructions, I just went, yeah, this looks pretty simple. And it's gone on pretty well. So now, just put a bit of air in it. And we have a tyre and Tannus all ready to go. It's got a little bit of a different feel, just sort of squeezing on it. A little bit more firmness across the tread, and a little bit softer in the sidewall. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it rides. So basically, I'll do the back now, and then I guess I'll head out for a ride and give you a bit of a review on what I think. Okay, so we're out at Stromlo, fitted up the Tannus. The second one actually was a lot easier than the first once I got the hang of it, and decided to come out and give it a bit of a try and see how it worked. I've got to say I'm really impressed with the way they, the ride and the speed and the cornering that you get from it. Now I suspect part of the difference is when you look at a normal, like a tube or even with a Cush Core in it, all the support is at the base, and so the edge of the tyre can still flex quite a bit. What the Tannus does, because the thickest part is under the tread, it seems to hold the tread a lot firmer. It's still deforming really nicely over small drops and little jumps and over bumps and things, but it actually feels like I'm maintaining a much better contact patch with the ground. So it's a little bit firmer. The bike's definitely rolling faster. It feels really good with its roll speed, but it also is cornering better. The grip level is noticeably better. And as I'm sort of trying to watch it as I'm going down the hill, you can almost actually see the sidewalls of the tyre bend a little bit more than usual, and the grip pattern just sort of stay a little bit better contact with the ground. Now over little bumps it seems to be absorbing them, so it's not skating around too much. It's just, yeah, it's quite a different feel. So coming off drops, it feels a little bit dead like a Cush Core would, and it gives that little bit of extra dampening into the tyre, which I actually quite like the feel of. Same with running through rocky sections. But the big difference for me was I found a really noticeable difference in the cornering grip. So when I was sort of pushing into corners on berms and even on some flat corners, it seemed to grip a lot better. The tyre wasn't squirming and it was still maintaining traction. And it felt like, from a grip point of view, that I was running a tubeless with less pressure in it. And to do that, then you start to lose some rolling resistance. So yeah, I really like that aspect of it. The other things I guess that are in its favour is the ease of changing, the fact that you are using a tube. I can actually change it in the field if I need to. It still offers pretty good rim protection. If you get a puncture, or you do rip a bit of a hole in the tread of your tyre, you can probably still use the tyre, whereas with tubeless it's now going to be useless because it just won't seal up. So there's a few advantages there. I don't think this is the ideal tyre combination for it. I think running the Minion DHs in a double down, there's a little bit too much thickness in the sidewall, and the tyres themselves are actually quite stiff. So I think with the Tannus in them, it's a little bit stiffer than what I would like. So my preference is probably to run a lighter sidewall tyre, which is also a good option because running double downs with Tannus and tubes is a pretty heavy combination. So my preference would be to run a little bit lighter. So I would say you could still run like an enduro format tyre. I'm really glad I tried it with my existing tyres because the additional grip is really awesome. And if I'd have just changed tyres as well, I probably would have given a bit more credit to the actual tyre than to the Tannus, because I kind of wasn't expecting to get quite this much extra grip out of the liner. So yeah, it's good to try with these tyres. I'm going to try with some lighter tyres, and I think fiddling with tyre pressure and maybe even my rebound a little bit, I can still improve the handling even further. Overall, really happy. I'm definitely going to be running the Tannuses, so I think for me they're probably a better option than the Cush Core. They are a bit cheaper. Obviously, if you're concerned about weight and you don't need that extra protection and so forth, then you're probably not going to run any sort of tyre liner. But if you do want something, then I think these Tannuses are definitely something worth trying. It's simple, they're easy to fit. I like the concept of being able to use tubes. I believe they actually provide better grip than what I was getting with the Cush Cores, and also a better rolling speed. So all over, I think it's basically a bit of a win-win. So yeah, thanks for watching the review, guys. Hopefully you liked it and it was useful to you. Feel free to message if you've got any questions, and we'll see you guys out on the trails.